Keelan is one of my business partners on a project. On the other side, it was a little different from technology, but technology is involved to a degree, I suppose. But
Yeah,
it's we covered the business of cannabis.
right.
The other thing that I like to point out, I don't have to point out to too many people, that tourism is like typically the number two business in the state behind autos, sometimes behind agriculture, but it vies for two to three typically in any given year. So one of the things that we've done, or are doing, I should say, is that we have the business of cannabis, and we also have looking at cannabis tourism. And so that's what we wanted to focus on today in this discussion. We
Yep.
have a website called Sparx and Recreation, and that's what it's dedicated to. Is not necessarily the plant touching folks, but all the tourism related to the folks coming to Michigan. And as anybody knows that covers the cannabis industry, if you're within all these dispensaries within 50 miles of our borders, 30 to 40% of their business is not coming from people from Michigan. So where are we going to put them up? Where are we going to feed them? All those sorts of things, right, Dan?
Yeah, you're reading my notes.
I know. Yeah, I do occasionally, but
So, so thanks for having me on. I wanted to talk a little bit to folks about Sparks and Rec. We've been doing the business to business stuff for 4 or 5 years. And last fall, we launched a digital magazine with a new website and a brand that's really focused on tourism, events, products, maybe a little more of a consumer focus than a typical business to business publication would have. But it's driven by, if I could just set it up, it's driven by kind of 5 things that a lot of people may not know. So cannabis is last I read, it's the third largest cash crop in the state. So, from an economic point of view, in terms of jobs, I know your last guest was talking about jobs. More than 35,000 jobs in Michigan are in the cannabis industry today. Year over year, we're up 107% in terms of adult use sales, first 7 months of this year versus first 7 months of last year. The industry is going to hit 3.3, Mike. I think you told me billion this year, right? So,
well, we don't know that for sure, but we're on that run rate.
We're on that route, right.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to do some things that anticipate some huge growth. And as you said, the tourism part of it, if you live in Michigan, you're aware that we're a destination state. If you pay taxes in Michigan, you know that some of that's going to support pure Michigan. It's a state that if we grew up here, that we all love and we're all proud of. And I think, Mike, you talked about this. The dispensaries in Michigan that are within 50 miles of the border, their sales are up 30% this year. Or I'm sorry, 31. Their sales are up 100% from last year. Their traffic is 30% out of staters. So we're looking at all of that and thinking, okay, because for as much of that, as you think about the idea of cannabis tourism, the term, for some people, it's kind of a new idea. The idea that people are going to come here because we're an adult use legal state, or while they're here, they're going to look for a festival or a cannabis friendly venue, or they're going to look for products. So we've been doing a lot to build a brand that talks about the growth in this industry. And the timing, at least for me, of being on with you, is to kind of point out that we're looking for stories, sponsors, people that can help us with an event after the first year, all kind of organized around the growth in cannabis tourism in Michigan.
Well, yeah, you think about it, and there are entire magazines devoted to wine tourism, right?
That's right.
There is a wine tourism magazine. That's the title of the thing.
Yeah.
And, Wine Spectator and Winemaker and a whole bunch of other magazines that
Right.
deal with this.
Right.
And my wife and I took a little trip to Canada yesterday, drove around east of Windsor and then down south to Lake Erie, the North Shore of Lake Erie. And there's a bajillion wineries down there, and a bunch of bed and breakfasts. So I think we're probably going to start seeing the same thing with cannabis, right?
Yeah, I think we are. And I think that's a great point, because when you think about the popularity of breweries, of wineries, of B&Bs, of cooking shows, right? All of that around an experience that I can taste, or there's something that I can drink, or something new. That's exciting to people. It gets a lot of attention. And I think if you're a business person in Michigan and you're in the entertainment industry, you may want to think about it, because it's more than rolling a joint, right? It's cannabis infused beverages. It's cannabis infused cooking. It's pointing out new and innovative products. And if you look at the jobs that it represents and the tax base that is supported by by the sales, I still think the municipalities that have opted out are crazy, just from an economic point of view.
Hello.
But that's a different show, maybe.
Yeah.
There's a great business opportunity here, and it sets us apart, because we're surrounded by states where it's still not
Yep.
legal.
Yeah.
Forget
Aside from Illinois. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Indiana, it's never going to happen there.
Right.
Ohio, they're struggling trying to get it up and running to be on the ballot in November, but the governor's pledged to veto it or something. I don't know. And then, of course, the Canadians have been national for years,
Yeah.
and have done real well with that. It's just the U.S., because it's still a Schedule I drug, which brings me to another topic. A lot of the mainstream restaurants, bars, hotels are still shying away from it because it's still a Schedule I drug. And of course, you can't smoke in restaurants in Michigan. But I mean, a lot of restaurants I've visited have like a little place outside with a little pavilion where you can go out and smoke your brains out, cigarettes, I mean.
Right.
And so there's ways to get around it. So
sure. And a lot of that will change eventually. I mean, the whole issue with cannabis being illegal at a federal level, impacts a lot of things that I wish would go away. Like, it's you can't write off these expenses for a lot of businesses, because from the IRS point of view, you're involved in an illegal business. So how are we going to let you, write off your cannabis advertising expenses? There's things like that are realities that I think business people in Michigan recognize, but it doesn't stop them from trying to move ahead. I think the industry is full of great entrepreneurs. And that's hard work, right? But in fact, I was thinking, and you guys know this because we've worked on something together, the three of us, that has nothing to do with this industry, and that is marketing and education and events around mobility, EVs, AVs, robots, and drones. But to me, the similarity is we live in a state that's trying to take a leadership role in that area. We also live in a state that's trying to take a leadership role in terms of cannabis. In both of those examples, you've got some innovative things, or you've got some things that scare people. I mean, if cannabis scares people, so does AI. And my attitude is, fine, get over it, right? Or learn more about it so that you're not fear-driven, but you see the opportunity. And so I think the opportunity for business people with our business is to work with us to help tell your story, because no matter how great you are in an emerging industry, nobody knows who you are. I talk to people all the time, and I say, okay, I know what your business does, and I know who your leaders are, but people don't know who you are yet. And so there's an opportunity, and I think a responsibility for a lot of these companies. Let's introduce what's going on in Michigan in the tourism space. And then for sponsors, we want to help them introduce themselves. What do they stand for? What kind of leaders are they? What are they doing that'll help educate the rest of the state? And so if people contact me, there's lots of ways. We want to interview business leaders. We want to turn those interviews into blog posts. We want to link to those interviews in our social media and our email. We have a Business of Cannabis event on the drawing boards for March. Don't have a specific date yet because we're still pulling it together. But the opportunity for you, if you're a business person out there, Mike creates the content. You talk to Mike, you get an interview, you're on the 420 Post website, or you've got a feature in the Sparx Recreation website. We promote you to 500,000 people every week in social media. Maybe in March, you're one of our panelists, because we're bringing the business community together to talk about what's next and give you an opportunity for leadership. So our business is really media. And I think business to business media has to create ways to help business people tell their stories, get a little more famous, right? Get some brand recognition, do all the things you need to do if you're going to try and drive business growth, especially in an industry that didn't exist 10 years ago.
Well, and in terms of how to do it right, I think the recent example provided by the little pavilion they had at Arts Beats and Eats is a fine example of how you sort of put cannabis into an event and regulate it well and make sure everything's run well.
Yeah, that's right. And by example, it's less disruptive than people might have thought, and it's more mainstream. And if you want to participate or not, you don't have to, right? And yeah, I completely agree.
You don't have to go in the beer tent either, right? So
Well, and one of the big trends, particularly for folks, even the baby boomers, is edibles and infused beverages, so that you're not actually smoking. I mean, I would never call myself an athlete, but I've tried to stay physically fit over the years. So, I mean, that would have more appeal for me than smoking would be, consuming it in some way. So.
Well, and I think, Mike, that's an important thing, because we don't necessarily have to claim to be athletes, but there is a lot of interest in health. So there are lots of people out there smarter than me that understand the ins and outs of veganism, right? Or the ins and outs of certain strength training. Well, there are people that will talk to you about how a cannabis infused approach is a lot better than drinking a couple bottles of wine. Or if you're a veteran who's suffering from PTSD, a lot of those folks say, give me some cannabis so I can sleep, and stop forcing me to take pharmaceuticals that are kind of shoved down my throat by the FDA. And I know that's another show too. But the point is, it isn't a counterculture approach. It's really a health, diet, and choice kind of proposition, as I think of it.
And
absolutely.
where can folks find out more, Dan Keelan?
So sparxnrec.com. So it's SPARXNREC.com is the website. You can reach me, Dan, at 420mediagroup.com. You can call me, 313-806-6986. And again, the proposition here is for companies that are in a leadership position in cannabis generally, with a focus on tourism, events, products. We'd love to talk to you. We'd love to tell your story. We'd like to get you on our show, on our podcast, and our publications. And as we move toward the March event, we will rely on sponsors and experts to help us shape that for sure, because they know more than I do.